So one of the things I always tell students, and I'll get to the answer to this, but one of the things I always tell students when we're talking about a problem, I can walk into a room of engineers and ask them, how do I build a better mousetrap? And they'll take out their pen and they'll design it. But if I want to catch mice, I could just get a cat. So when we look at this transportation infrastructure situation and we look at what we're talking about, well, we have to fix the roads, we have to do this, we're going to continue to have these issues, we do need to start to think about what tomorrow is going to look like and what we want tomorrow to look like so that we can design for today. And that is the question when we're talking about sustainability. It's how are we going to survive and thrive this generation and future generations, which means just fixing the bridges and just fixing potholes is not going to get us to the type of quality of life that any of us hope for or hope for our kids or our grandkids.
Do you think technology, the idea of driverless trucks, or even things like truck lanes, those kinds of things contribute to the solution, or is that not even thinking forward enough?
I think they can be part of the solution. We always forget, and myself included when I'm on the road, that truck is bringing something that I'm likely going to go buy, and they make a very good point with that. We also forget the rail system, which is also crumbling, which could alleviate some of the stress on the roads if we had improved the rail system and if we could improve commuter rail as opposed to just commercial rail. We would also enhance our opportunities. So I think it's a holistic system, and we always look at problems very linearly and individually and forget that they all interconnect.
Okay, so Jim, what's the highway of the future look like for you?
Well, honestly, I think we're really at changing times. If you kind of go back and look at within the last 2 years at the Detroit, the auto industry, just the technology that has been advanced on the automobile right now. 2 years ago, you really didn't hear much about the safety features of the vehicles themselves. And now, I mean, every day, you're hearing more and more and more. So our technology is changing right in front of our eyes. It's on an exponential growth pattern. If you kind of look back, what has really happened and taken place in the last 10 years, and it's going to continue. If you look at next 10 years, it's hard to say how dramatic this change is going to be right before our eyes, but it's coming, and it's coming quickly. And I know there's a lot of policy that needs to be ironed out. There's still technology. You look at our climate,
Right.
Snow, rain, wind, how are the vehicles going to deal with that? There's still a lot to be ironed out, but it's really going to change how we live and how our communities are developed, and how all of our transportation is developed for the future.
Any thoughts specifically about what that may look like for this region? Is there one thing that pops out at you that you think we're doing here, or that where you think we're going to be ahead or behind the game some way? Right.
I'll jump in real quickly on what that looks like in the future, and the short answer is I don't think we know yet. It's very, very difficult to tell, and a big reason for that is it may be that with and I'm going to call them automated vehicles rather than autonomous, because they're not really autonomous. They communicate with each other, they communicate with infrastructure. That may actually increase the amount of vehicles or the amount of miles that are driven. At the same time, though, as was alluded to, when they're connected, they can travel closer together, they act more efficiently, so maybe you don't need as much road space. If you want to know where this stuff goes, go to kind of where the money comes from. Morgan Stanley did this analysis, and they said, if you think of mobility as a product, which is to say you think of selling cars, worldwide there's about 80 million cars a year that are sold at about $19,500 per car. That makes that a $1.5 trillion industry, which is about 2% of global GDP. If you start thinking about mobility as a service in which you don't own the actual vehicle but you use it, you have 10 trillion miles traveled per year at $1 per mile is now $10 trillion. That's a big, big difference. That's now all of a sudden 13% of GDP. So you've gone from 80 million times 19,500, 1.5 trillion, to 10 trillion times $1, 10 trillion. That's a big difference in how that industry adapts. So I always like to say, when you look at it back in the early 1900s when they were looking at building these roads, it was the public side that was out front, right? We started regulating. We said, well, roads have to be designed like this. They have to be this wide, made out of these materials. They can't have more than this degree of a curve. Google waits for no one, Alphabet, and Uber, and they got into these things. And now they're driving it. And this idea that you're going to have, the driverless, highway, no way. they've already said, we don't need to be separated, we'll make them work within the other vehicles. They know they have to if they want to get that product to market. So I don't know that we know exactly what it's going to look like, but just because we don't know what it's going to look like doesn't mean we shouldn't be shaping our own vision of the future and saying that we want more of that multimodal system, and we want to start having a system where we have technology that's resulting in less emissions and, more importantly, fewer accidents. Excuse me, they're not accidents, they're crashes. Accidents, yeah, thanks, sorry about that. Even after all these years, I still slip up, so my apologies.
So I just wanted to chime in on the question as far as our area. The film was talking about transportation and how do we plan for this, and ultimately it goes to community planning, and what it looks like 10 years from now has a lot to do with what we choose as a community to prioritize in our plans. And right now is a great opportunity with the city of Rochester in particular with all of their updated plans. And I'm excited by the fact that they're starting to talk about a smart city and smart infrastructure and how do we plan for that, because that can really change the story around what the transportation needs are and what the community looks like. But I think we need to go back to the fact that the communities and the economy are supposed to serve the people, not vice versa, and these conversations are always focused on a specific industry or a specific economy. So we need to start talking about what the community should look like for the people in it, and then how do all of those other pieces serve those people.
So what are some of the roles? Oh, sure, go ahead, James.
One of the things we hear about is, you're hearing it right now, we really don't know. Things are changing so rapidly. So one of the things that we've integrated into our long-range plan is the idea of recognizing and accepting there's uncertainty. So what can we do in our decisions today and how we design facilities so as not to preclude something beneficial happening later? I mean, sometimes, if you're out rebuilding a road, you could put a conduit in the road. You don't know what's going to go in there eventually, but when something needs to go in there, you don't have to tear up the road to put it in there. So what can we do? What decisions can we make? What accommodations can we make now so we don't preclude that happening later or undo the work we just did?
So that's related to my question, which is that I don't think that, even though we hear words like, you need to be nimble or companies and communities need to be agile, it doesn't seem like transportation and infrastructure is a place where there's a lot of agility. Am I wrong about that?
I would like to add, we just have a project we're starting in New York City for the Long Island Railroad. And right now, at this point in time, in a lot of their stations, they're projecting a need for parking garage structures. As part of our design process, we are now looking to the future and saying, okay, in 10, 15, 20 years, what if we don't need that garage? So we're trying to incorporate now into the design process, how can we build maybe some of the bones of the garage that can be easily converted into maybe the top layer is a park, residential, commercial, but how can you build some of that infrastructure now that it can be easily accommodated for some of the things that may happen in the future?
Okay. I have one more question, and then I'll be glad to open it up to the audience if you guys have questions or discussion points. At WXXI, we have a whole lot of topics that we glean from the community. We ask the community to talk to us about things that are important. And transportation comes back to us as an issue that has importance. We've had Reconnect Rochester on the air quite often, talking about transportation alternatives, talking about a more sustainable community. My question is, because I hear this sometimes from viewers and listeners, how do we engage viewers and listeners in a way that gets them excited about the word infrastructure or transportation? I think, they touched on this in the film a little bit, trying to tell regular citizens what you can do, certainly from their perspective. But I think that because this film illustrated to me that it's really a lot of different moving targets, and it kind of makes me feel as a citizen like I can't do much. So I kind of wonder, how do we address that? And I'll just open it up. Anybody who wants to address that can address it.
That is something we find is very difficult, and I think the challenge becomes how close are the people to the project? How close is that project to me? How do I feel an impact? Because people are so busy and have so many things going on, they have to prioritize. We struggle to get input on our 25-plus year plan. And it's these big concepts, these big ideas. there are people that have vested interest, they're advocating for a particular group, whatever it might be, their interests kind of get in there because there's some people that are really engaged in the topic. And then, we get to the point where we're deciding funding for particular projects. And again, we struggle to get people to come out and tell us, geez, these 100, 150 projects, what do you think about them? But the moment that a project now goes in front of somebody's house, now they're interested, now they're engaged. But sometimes it's not even until the end when construction starts because they've set aside the flyers and the notices and the things where, it might be the city of Rochester, it might be Monroe County. Come tell us what you think, give us your feedback. And it's very difficult to get people to prioritize that until it is on their front step.
Other thoughts?
I think one of the challenges that we do have on the transportation side, and I mean, the Interloop is a great example. It's
Yeah.
taken us almost 25 years to get to this point, which is difficult for the communities. I think when people look at this, and we're in the day now that everything is instantaneous, and quite frankly, our transportation projects are not instantaneous, in which it's hard to get people's involvement and interest in the project when it takes so long. So there are definitely some things I think on the policy side at the higher level and just our design processes and our environmental processes that need to be streamlined so we can get these projects to the community quicker and hopefully that maybe engage the community in the projects.
Enid?
So infrastructure is kind of like sustainability. As I tell students, it's not really sexy. Most of the stuff is behind the scenes that's happening or what's important. But I think there's two things. One is that you need to meet people where they are, so you have to find a way to speak their language. What about infrastructure resonates with them? So their story about Amazon delivering to your doorstep, those kinds of things resonate with people, so you have to put the spin on it. But the other piece is that sometimes it just takes really strong leaders and with a good vision to stick to a plan when it's not popular. A town that I used to live in had a Rails to Trails project that was being fought tooth and nail by the NIMBYs, by the Not in My Backyard. They were afraid it was going to bring bad elements into their backyard, into their neighborhood. Now their property values are probably 30% more than what they were when they did it, and of course everyone loves that project. But those leaders fought hard. Some of them lost their seats because they knew it was the right thing for the community. So sometimes when infrastructure is not sexy, but it's really important and it's for the greater good, we just need really strong people to do the right thing.
Great point, thank you. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you have questions or comments that you would like to make, there's a microphone right here if you don't mind using it. If you do mind, is there one in the audience too? Oh, hi, okay, great. We can pass that one around too, so go right ahead. We'll start right here, and then we'll get right to you. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the panel and the film. One of the points of the film also seemed to be pretty strong about raising the gas tax as a means to pay for that infrastructure, and I wondered if the panel had any other, well, what your opinion was about that, and if you had any other ideas about how the revenue could be raised for infrastructure besides gas tax.
James?
Well, you may recall in the film, they also talked about it being very easy to implement. You can't cheat at the pump. The ideas of doing a vehicle miles tax, well, how are you going to report that? How are you going to pay that? How are you going to avoid people dodging the reporting system? One of the challenges we have is when Congress does not have an appetite to raise the gas tax, but yet they pass transportation bills that authorize more spending than the gas tax brings in, the fuel tax. Right now, the Highway Trust Fund is running at a deficit. So it's being funded from the general fund. So it's not that we're spending less money, now it's coming out of the general fund, which means those dollars can't be spent on something else that might also be a national priority. So I think when you look at 18.4 cents a gallon, back when, in 1993, when gas was, what, about $1.10 a gallon. So you're talking somewhere in the 15-20% of the pump price for what's going to the federal government. Now you're up in the $2.75, $3 range, but it's still that 18.4 cents. Your cars are more fuel efficient. People are driving less, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you have competing national interests. It says we want better environment, we want more fuel efficient vehicles, but our revenue stream is tied to people driving more. So that is a real challenge to overcome.
I will also chime in and point out that with the current administration's plan to roll back the CAFE standards, it's akin to trying to maintain that gas tax by keeping higher gas mileage vehicles on the road. Unfortunate side effect, but that's one of the ways of getting it.
Yeah, I would just add that if you look at it, if you have a vehicle that you drive, I think it's 15,000 miles a year, and you get the EPA average, say 20 miles a gallon, your weekly contribution, that's the average obviously because you have different types of vehicles out there, but your weekly contribution to the Highway Trust Fund is about the equivalent of a large Starbucks coffee a week. And I don't know how you build or maintain the system you have. I always used to give that example when I would show the Starbucks coffee, and then in my presentation I would transition it to an iPad, and I would say, nobody needed an iPad until Apple told them they did. We've needed roads and bridges and transportation systems for years and years and years, centuries, literally centuries. We don't do a good job of selling our product, and our product gets kids to school, seniors to doctor's appointments, people to jobs. We just don't do a good job of selling it. We're losing to other public, priorities. And again, I come back to education and crime. They always seem to get what they need in terms of resources. They'll tell you they don't, but when you look at the amount that we spend on those, and again, what are we getting back for it? I would say mixed results. We have a very good product. We don't do a good job of selling it because for the most part, we've maintained it with bubble gum and duct tape for as long as we have. And that just can't keep going on. But until there's a crisis, nobody seems to want to address it. In terms of other ways to pay for it, obviously, the fuel tax, because of those and they are subsidies from the general fund. For so long, it's been kind of seen as, well, it's a user fee. It's a user fee to some degree, yeah, probably more so than most things because it's direct, as Jim noted. The tax is already paid for by the time you put it in your car or your vehicle, so they know what's going. But I thought it was interesting because it's also the way we talk about things, right? We invest in highways and bridges, but we subsidize public transportation. And it's like, it's not like that. It's all transportation. This is how we move things around. It's all an investment if you do it right and if it's performance-based and data-driven.
By the way, I am in favor of a gas tax. I'm probably the only one that's comfortably okay saying that in public, but I am in favor of it. I'm in favor of it going up.
Sure. First of all, I would like to commend Reconnect and the Films Committee for taking the bold step of showing this. I find that as a full-year cyclist, I have a strange synergy with the viewpoint presented by a lot of these truck drivers, which is that that cholesterol that they were talking about, not the regional or delivery trucks, it's all of those personal automobiles driven by amateurs who don't really obey the rules, who are concerned with only themselves, who are not being professional, who are endangering us all, truckers, cyclists, everybody. So it's an important perspective to see for us, so thank you for that. But the point that I'd like to make, Jim mentioned uncertainty in designing and planning. Well, there is certainty, and the certainty is that the system that we've designed, the overall strategy that we designed 50 years ago, 80 years ago, is not sustainable and it's not scalable. So merely committing more money to more lane miles, to more wider highways, more highway footprints is not the way to go. Responsible planning is looking at how we're changing the transportation system to something that's sensible, that moves people. Two of the examples that you gave, elderly people to their doctor's appointments and children to school, have nothing to do with private automobile transportation. Public transportation serves that need much better. Getting people to work. Many people in this community are not able to go to work in private vehicles. A redesigned transportation system is the answer. So my point is that, yes, we are at a point where we have to change what we're doing, but we have to change what we're doing with an entirely different strategic approach, not just with fixing up and scaling up the road system.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say that is what we're doing in this region. We don't scale up the roads here. We've not built new capacity The last time you're gonna see anything in this region built new would be the John Street extension down south of RIT. And what that did was create an opportunity to give people an alternative way to get to 390 and the thruway without having to, send trucks and things down through the crowded marketplace area. Another was the extension, Jetview Drive out, if you're coming from 490 on the west side, they call it the Airport Connector, Route 204, and it feeds into the Wegmans distribution area on a more direct route so that trucks can move more efficiently and more safely. By and large, our region, we're making spot improvements here or there. We might put a turn lane, but there's not been a widening project. There's not been a capacity project. And Rich mentioned earlier, we talked about strategic divestment. In the past 5 years in this region, we've removed 5 bridges. One of those, we didn't think of, until I was invited to a conference last week, a roundtable discussion on right sizing. I hadn't really thought of the inner loop as a right sizing project. But when you look at that project, when it was designed back in the 50s at Kodak and Bausch & Lomb and Xerox were all downtown, and 330,000 people lived in Rochester, and every indication was that it was going to grow and that we were going to need this facility. I think the designers at that time made the best decision they could with the information and what they expected. Now, it never fulfilled that vision. So flash forward 50 years, and the traditional way would have been, geez, the Monroe Ave Bridge is starting to fall apart. We got to replace that bridge. The Broad Street Bridge, the East Avenue Bridge, the retaining walls, the pavement, all these different elements that in a traditional sense would have been looked at individually and said, we need to fix those. The city said, we've got a different vision for this area. We know that the state DOT owns the road. We want them to think differently. And to their credit, the state at the time said, okay, we'll listen. Now you have a facility out there that through the design process was responsive when the public said, maybe we should line that up on Union Street, and we continued the street grid. We're opening up 6 acres of land to private development. We took away 12 lanes of traffic and replaced it with 4 lanes, I think, Eric? Yeah, maybe some turn lanes here or there. We have done this in a strategic way. The idea of what do we need today versus what did they think we needed 50 years ago. That's happening already. And when you consider that the Monroe Ave Bridge, the Broad Street Bridge, the East Avenue Bridge, and 2 bridges out in Orleans County, in 5 years' time, 5 bridges coming off the system. Those bridges will never need to be inspected again. They'll never need to be maintained again. They won't have to have investment in them. They won't collapse because now they're not there.
Are there any other questions? Way up in there. Can we get the microphone back there?
First, I just want to
Comment on what you said, and I'm very pleased the way you said it as far as right sizing, because it really bothers me when people say the inner loop was a mistake. It might not be the right solution today, and it's the right thing to do is to replace it, and I think it's a great project. But it wasn't a mistake when it was built, it was the right solution. And it makes us, the engineers like I am, it makes it sound like we made mistakes. We did make mistakes, it was just the right solution at the time. It's not the right solution now. And we're smart enough to realize that we can change things, so that's good. But the question I have with back to the funding issue, because our current administration seems to think that private investment is going to solve this problem, and that we're going to somehow make money for private people by privatizing our roadways. I can see that happening perhaps in the Midwest, where you tell a developer, all right, if you make this road 4 lanes or 6 lanes wide or improve it, then you get the developed rights, or you can put a toll here. But how does it ever work in the Northeast, where our existing infrastructure needs to be rebuilt? So we're going to speak to that funding possibility, but that looks like that's the way they want to go.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, only having looked at a number of these options for various places, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there is this idea that whatever the president's infrastructure program, it seems to grow exponentially every time he talks about how much it's going to generate, but it still only has $200 billion behind it, and it's going to be $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion. And you're absolutely right. I mean, those things work for things like airports. They work for toll roads. There are limited instances where private investment gets into it. But to have private investment, you have to have a return. And that return has to be generated from something. If it's user fees, then you have tolls. If you were to toll any road around here that's not currently tolled, because of the capacity we have, people would just shift. You toll 490, you're gonna see everybody on routes 31, 33, 96. You go ahead and name it. It's not gonna work. Roads like this, when you have just generally, and I would say even in the areas that have them, and you look out in like Orange County, where they had one of the first ones and it's been taken over, you have to have a private concessionaire, somebody who's willing to say, I will feel as if I can make a financial return on this. My rate of return has to be X for this to be worthwhile. And you end up with things like the Indiana Tollway, which I think it was Macquarie or maybe Sintra. It was out of a foreign concessionaire. They came in and said, we'll operate it. Well, they went belly up, and the state of Indiana actually got a sweet deal out of it because they got a completely newly built road at a bargain basement price. But again, now they've got the issue of having to maintain it. So tolls work for certain things, but they don't. You can't go and start tolling existing capacity. You can toll new capacity, and then you start getting into these equity issues. Are these now Lexus lanes? I mean, what is the point of doing it? Is you're giving people a jump up? And again, coming back to the performance-based decision-making, is that the best use of that versus some of these things that are in the billions of dollars that could be used for some type of a system, whether it's public transportation or what I'll call a truly fully developed active transportation system that you could do with that exact same money, or probably a whole heck of a lot less. And what's the benefit of that when you simply just don't look at it as how many vehicle miles traveled or how many hours of delay are we reducing, but you're saying how many person hours or person miles of travel have we shifted to something that's healthier and more beneficial for not only the individual but the entire community.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll start to wrap it up. So, did you see what was?
Okay. I guess what's always struck me about America is that it loves to just buy stuff, and I'm not into that. You know, I remember like Jimmy Carter, like apparently in 1978, we were getting squeezed by OPEC. Came on TV, put on a sweater, and said, "Turn down your heat." And I read about that, and I thought, that, he's my man, And so I remember when I was an undergrad and I took macroeconomics and I shared with my dad, I was like, okay, how are we going to deal with climate change? I said, Dad, we're going to price stuff so high that people aren't going to buy so much stuff. And he said, you're never going to do that. That's not going to work. And it turns out he's right. All this stuff about Amazon and people dropping in with drones, I'm not into it. I don't care. I'm not going to do that. And I'm, when I would ask of you guys, or I don't know if you have any insight on this at all, but I'm looking for the political person who's going to do this to stand up and say, buying stuff is killing us. And that we're going to meet this standard of this idea that we have to supply an infrastructure that's going to allow us to get every single last thing that we can imagine that we want, and that's good, is wrong. And I'm waiting for that person who's going to stand up and say that.
So I have a feeling they're going to probably stay quiet, so I'll chime in.
Go, Enid, go.
I concur, though. I would like to say that I buy nothing, but obviously I go grocery shopping. I do a lot of things, so I do my best to thrift and not actually buy anything new. So I concur, and I understand it. Our challenge is our modern society tells us we're inadequate if we don't buy X, Y, and Z, and we don't keep up with the Joneses, and marketing. The marketing industry has done an incredible job in doing that to us. What I'm encouraged by, and Rich mentioned it a little bit, is the service model. When you talk about not needing to buy something, but rather share. And we see a lot of that sharing economy really starting to grow, especially with the younger generations, when we see all these apps to get people to share things. And I run a program on campus where students that are discarding all of their stuff at the end of the year, while I have other students that go out, salvage it all, we sell it to students coming back in the next year because they buy the same stuff that they would have bought otherwise, so we just try and recycle it. So I think that there's an appetite for it in the younger generations. I think in the teaching an old dog new tricks realm, it's a little harder, but I do see that younger populations are less interested in even driving their own car. They prefer to Uber. They don't necessarily even want their license. I think that we'll see a shift, and I'm all for that shift because I think that consumerism is definitely killing us. And so I hope we can start to see a change, but I think part of that solution is going to go to looking towards more sharing and service-based instead of just must own, must discard, must buy something new again.
Thank you. Enid Cardinal, Richard Perrin, James Stack, and Jim Hofmann, please give them a big hand. Thank you so much for your time tonight.